This could not be real. Fate or the green men wouldn't make her 13 and her mom, 8 or 9? No one, even a green whatever, could be that cruel. Dex went to the bed and picked up the present, though he didn't lift out the rock, just turned the box as if studying it. You got one too. It's from the green men, Desi said. We all got one. Well, the grown-ups. Kids don't need one to be kids because they're already kids. Where are these green men, Daisy? He asked. Maybe they're Santa's elves, Gini said, and got an annoyed look from Dex. No, silly. You saw them when you came in, she said. They said they needed to talk to Vanessa. The look Dex shot toward Gini was too grown up for the body currently housing the eyes. It was laced with sheriff and thoughtful, and something a 13-year-old shouldn't know or feel. But she wasn't really 13, she reminded herself. Neither of them were. Her brain was still her brain, even if she stopped that thought cold and shot back a look she hoped was equally grown up and skeptical, because it kind of felt like she'd mentally put out her tongue. Really, Dex? Mixing a little sci-fi into your... Well, she didn't know what this was, but it wasn't reality. Why did they want to talk to Van? Dex asked, ignoring her look, and she presumed the attitude. NASA, silly, Desi said with familiar awe. She's not as good as Spock, of course. Well, who would be, Gini said. She made more money working for the Big Chill, but NASA, they had the same bodies, or had. She cast a baleful glance at her reflection, but they did not have the same brains. Van's had a much higher IQ lurking inside her skull, not to mention better taste in clothes. Still, Gini felt she had more alien experience, even if it was all fictional. So the green men should have wanted to talk to her. Okay. That thought was so messed up she should be embarrassed by it. At least she hadn't said it out loud. They said no one ever asks to be taken to a leader. That never goes well. That? Against her will, Gini asked the question. You mean first contact? Desi beamed. That's what they called it. First contact. Gini looked at Dex, rising unease, nipping at her certainty this wasn't real. Then she looked at her bedroom door. Was the truth out there? And if it was, Mulder would be ticked he'd missed it. Dex insisted that they stack by her door, even though none of them were armed and all of them were shorter than they should be. He peered out into the hall. Clear, he said tersely. It would have been kind of sexy if he hadn't been 13 and trying to keep his robe on with one hand. She rested a hand on his shoulder and felt a flashback to when she'd really been 13 and they'd been sneaking down to watch a critter flick and eat chocolate. She'd rested her hand on his shoulder then, too, following closely on his heels and wishing he'd get a clue. We should check on the kids, she said. The other kids, Biff's kids. Was she starting to believe? Her hands curled into fists. Dex glanced back and saw the fists. It's not my fault, he said. Almost she grinned. I know that. Dream or not, she knew who to blame. She looked at Desi, who beamed back. I told you that this would be the best Christmas ever. She bounced on the edge of the bed, her eyes bright stars in the dim light. She'd said that last night. Did that make the dream theory more or less viable? We should stick together. Gini said it reluctantly, uncomfortable with how conflicted she felt about her mom now that she was 8. She'd been a pretty cute kid. Was a pretty cute kid, Gini mentally corrected. This version of her mom mirrored the photos she'd seen in the albums, but without the fading. This was Desi in crisp technicolor. But it, very uncomfortably, also mirrored the weirdness of caring for an aging parent. For years it had seemed like she and Van were getting older while their mom got smaller and, yes, younger. Though not in a manageable way. Their mom was an adult and could still make decisions, even the ones that drove them crazy. Instead of talking about dates and books or movies, the hot topic at the water cooler these days was how they dealt with their aging parents. She could not escape the irony of this, even in her dreams, apparently. Okay, Daisy hopped off and trotted over to join them as Dex led them slowly down the hall, sticking close to the wall in a cute mimicry of Big Dex. At Daphne's room, he hesitated, then gave a soft knock. Knocked again, then again. A surly, sleepy voice finally called out, "What?" Dex took that as permission to open the door and peer in. Gini pushed past him and walked to the bed, then looked back at him. "She's the same." Gini looked around. No present. "I told you they didn't get one. They're already kids," Desi said, peering in. "Excuse me, I'm trying to sleep." Mild, very mild interest filtered into her eyes. "Who are you?" "You don't want to know," Gini said. "Did you have a present when you came to bed? A warm rock?" Daphne stared at her for a long moment, then rolled over and pulled the covers over her head. "I'll take that as a no," Dex said, backing up so Gini could close the door again. They both looked at Isaac's door. Dex didn't knock this time. It was Gini's turn to hang out in the doorway. This room was dim as well, but Isaac, an unchanged version, was sitting up, his face lit by the green glow of his game. Almost, she'd have suspected him of delivering the rocks. He didn't look up. "What?" "Just making sure you're all right," Dex said. The words were adult. The timbre of his voice was 13-year-old boy entering puberty. Isaac looked up then and regarded them curiously. "Who are you?" "I'm Dex." Gini hit his arm. "Dexter James Tolliver. You'll scare him." "He's going to find out anyway," Dex pointed out, "and he doesn't look scared to me." He was right about that. Mostly Isaac looked interested. "You shrunk." "We all did, except you and Daphne." "Really?" He picked up the notebook by his bed and started writing. He paused. "Theories?" "We got a present last night, this rock that glowed and felt warm when I touched it. Did you get one?" Dex asked. He looked at him, his gaze wide until a slow blink. Then he shook his head. It was probably the little green men. "I hope I wake up soon," Gini said as Dex paused at the top of Log's staircase. "I can't be B13 again. I sucked at it then, and it will be worse now because I know how bad it will be." People joked about going back and doing it better. But no one really believed anyone could do the glory days better. All they could hope for was to get out alive and then pretend it had been awesome when they went to their high school reunions. "Shh," Dex said, peering over the banister into the deep gloom below. "They left," Isaac said, looking up from his game, which apparently he could do while walking and talking. Dex swung around. "How do you know?" "I went and got a glass of milk when I woke up." "They could have come back," Gini said uneasily, even though she didn't believe any of it. At all. Or not much. "Right, let's go find out." Dex straightened the robe, or tried to, and started down, with half his entourage following at paces commensurate with their ages and attention spans. Gini stuck close because he was the sheriff, the really short sheriff, and he was Dex. Even when he'd really been 13, he'd been, well, Dex. It was all way too much like 13 in her memory. Gripping his shoulder with one hand, clutching the top of her pajamas with the other, she followed him from room to green alienless room, though Spock was still front and center on the tree. They ended in the kitchen. The milk carton stood forlornly on the table where Isaac had forgotten to put it back in the fridge. Gini, because her brain wasn't 13, replaced it and wiped up the drips with a cloth that she then hung neatly over the sink faucet. A pity she also remembered the feeling of not quite fitting into her body anymore. She wanted to claw her way out. Instead, she turned and studied Dex, who had gone into mulling mode. Desi began to move around in patterns that made sense to her, but no one else. Isaac got the milk out and had another glass of milk while apparently continuing with his game on his device. Almost she'd suspect him of having more than 2 arms. Of course, he left the milk out again, which Gini had to return and wipe up more drips. They needed help, but who were they going to call, assuming they could find the phone and it worked? Alien busters? How did they explain this? Who would believe them? Isaac had taken their transition to pure okay, but what kind of authority would any of them have over Daphne? Assuming she could be convinced they were who they said they were, Gini didn't believe it. At least she wasn't willingly believing it. Why should Daphne believe them? We should call Biff. He wouldn't believe them, but he'd have to come. Might already be on the way, she thought with scant hope. Like Dex, she found herself wondering if their emergency might be related in some way to this alien contact, which was pretty much the only emergency at NASA she could imagine. Not that she believed yet. She could still wake up wondering what she ate last night to bring this on. Couldn't she? And how do we do that? I hit no bars on my cell about 5 miles from here. Dex suddenly looked more his physical age as the enormity of their problem began to dawn on him. There was no landline up here. Mom has some kind of phone service through the dish. Gini wasn't sure how it all worked. She looked at Desi, who was still writing patterns on the wooden floor, her thin arms outstretched. As far as she could tell, her mom's brain hadn't gotten younger, just her body. For emergencies, it's got to be here somewhere. Pleasance wouldn't bring her up here with no way to get help, particularly this time of year. I think we have to sweep the snow off the dish, though. She glanced toward the window. Piled up snow had collected on the ledges, blocking about half the view. The remaining glass was fogged over. She crossed over and rubbed a circle into fog and peered out. Huge white drifts filled what was usually a meadow or clearing in the summer. Snow weighed down the branches of the pine trees that raggedly surrounded the clearing, giving it a picture postcard perfection. She gasped and jumped back. What? Dex hurried to her side, glanced out, then wrenched open the door to the back porch. In the deep snow from last night's storm, they clearly saw the pattern of really, really small footprints going across the rear porch, down the steps, and then around the side of the house. As if on cue, they heard the click of something walking across the rooftop. Gini looked up, like she could see through the ceiling, then looked at Dex. Reindeer paws. Dateline, notes from Isaac's strategic planning notebook. What does it mean that they are up on the housetop? What is their purpose? Must assume it is hostile, since all adults have been shrunk to a more manageable size. No surprise they are not taking that well. Dateline, from Daphne's cell phone, sleep monitor, Snork. Dateline, advanced scouting party report. Protocol produced unreliable results. Studying data. Still trying to contact mothership. If we'd gone to Disneyland, we could be on the It's a Small World ride about now.